Director of the Mercer County Historical Society. Today we have Mr. Frech here. He's going to be teaching us about Native American activity along the St. Mary's River, specifically between 1700 and 1840 in Mercer County, Ohio. Those of you who are joining us by Facebook Live, thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to post them in the comments, and we will ask them at the end. Without further ado, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Clark. Relative of George Rogers Clark. A very significant person. I have no significant people in my background, so I mean, what the heck. Okay, thank you all for coming. Oh, and hopefully you read the part that went along with the announcement for this, that I am not any kind of authority at all on artifacts or arrowheads or any of that stuff. Some of these guys over here might be, but I'm not. But Native Americans along the St. Mary's River, 1700 to 1840. Take a look at this. Prehistory. Weaker areas, but before we have contemporary records. And for America in general, it's 1492, but for around here, it's later because people keeping written records are not coming in contact with the Native Americans in this area for quite a while, after 1492, back up until the 17th century. But when we look back at prehistory, this is not an area that's going to have a lot of settlement in it. This is a map made back in 1914 that shows archaeological digs done in Ohio then. And you can see where the concentration was. That's where Native Americans in the prehistoric period concentrated. In southern Ohio, southern central Ohio in particular. But up in Mercer County, Van Wert County, not much at all. This is a later map, and you'll see more archaeological digs here, but the reason for that increase is that when the state started to require, whenever they were going to do a project, that they had to do an archaeological dig beforehand to check it out for artifacts. And so there were digs that happened that they really didn't have any real good reason to do, but you do see some more examples here. You would have, even with a few numbers though, you would have found examples of Native Americans passing through the area or a few staying here in just about all the prehistoric periods. Yeah, examples like these. Maybe some structures like this, although not like the ones in the background there. You do have, when we talk about prehistoric times, and again, this is from the 1914 study, but these are examples of prehistoric structures in this area. In Mercer County, anyhow. Mounds, enclosures, I'll give you an example of that in a second, burial grounds. You can see through 6 of the townships in Mercer County, they had examples of this. This is what we mean by an enclosure. That is an enclosure. The ones you would have found here would not be as big as this one. See how one stretches way back there and everything? But they would have been smaller than this, and what they served, they were sites for ceremonies, religious ceremonies, civil ceremonies, a place where they could get together, possibly even a place to use for defense. But that's what we look at in enclosures. In the area along the St. Mary's, I don't know how well you guys can all see this, but there's the St. Mary's River. If you see, and I don't know how well you can see it, but near Rockford, there's an arc. That is an arc-shaped enclosure. If you come farther across and look down under the N in Dublin, next to number 23, that's a burial ground right there, or a burial site that they found. You come across until approximately where 127 is, north of the just north of the St. Mary's River, you would find a rectangular enclosure. And as you headed farther over toward Mendon, a circular enclosure. So we would have had those examples of prehistoric structures in the area. When we hit or head into the recorded period, we would have found the culture here, eastern woodland. Permanent or semi-permanent villages, dependent mainly on agriculture, to a lesser extent on hunting and gathering. Now, you have language groups. Two language groups predominate in this area. When you look at the map, you can see a dark purple up there in the northeast. Those people are Iroquoian. They speak the Iroquoian language. And that would include the Iroquois Confederacy, the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, and the Seneca. But there are other Iroquoian-speaking people, the Wyandot, Huron, the Erie. And the fact that they speak the same language doesn't mean, or they have the same language shorts, doesn't mean they get along. Same way the Germans and the English both speak Germanic language, and they didn't get along very well in the 20th century. The Iroquois Confederacy pretty much exterminated the Eries. Don't see a lot of Erie Indians, you see their lake, but not them. And they made serious war and almost did their best to exterminate the Hurons and the Wyandots. But the pink area there, those are Algonquin speaking. Shawnee, Delaware, Ottawa, Chippewa, Potawatomi. Those are all Miami, Algonquin speaking groups. The reason for that dark gray in the middle there, we'll come to that in a second. But there's actually a reason. And it has to do with these two terms right here. Mourning wars and beaver wars. In the 17th century, the Iroquois Confederacy, the dominant military power in the Northeast and into the Midwest, they started a series of wars. Some of these were what were called mourning wars. See, all these tribes have been hit with a demographic massacre. I mean, all these diseases had gone through them and killed off a large part of their population. And also they often had wars. And so they were hurting for population. And one thing the Iroquois did was they would go to war and they would attack people, like the Erie. They would take captives. Some of the captives they'd kill, some they would enslave, and others they would adopt into their tribe to fill the slot of Indians that had died off, of tribal members who had died off. And that was one reason for war. But even a bigger reason for what were called the Beaver Wars. You have this giant fur trade going on. This is a reason why a major reason why European powers are interested in this area, especially the French and the Dutch. The Iroquois want to control the fur trade. To do this, they war on neighboring tribes. And basically what they do is they ethnically cleanse Ohio. At the beginning of the 18th century, there are almost no Indians here at all. The Iroquois have kicked them out because they want to control the beaver trade. One particular area they have a lot of interest in is the Great Black Swamp, which is rich in furs. In 1700, though, 1701, I should be exact, the French got tired of this, and they pressured the Iroquois into making a peace settlement. The fighting stops, and the Beaver Wars stop at that time. And all at once, this area is open again for settlement, reoccupation. And the tribes start moving into the area. From the east, the Iroquois themselves come down. If you've ever heard the term Mingo, Mingo is a tribe. Well, Mingo isn't actually a tribe. They're a mix of all the different Iroquoian tribes, kind of throw-offs of each one. The Mingos are down here, some Senecas. From the east, driven all the way from the Delaware River, are the Delaware. And they come into eastern Ohio. The Shawnee come up from the south, out of the Carolinas. The Ottawa and the Wyandot come in from the north, and the Miami come in from the west. And notice who controls this area. This is Miami land. They're the ones that are going to claim this area. And again, we all know, we associate Wapakoneta with the Shawnees, of course. What most people don't know, maybe you guys already know this, Wapakoneta was an Ottawa settlement before it was a Shawnee settlement. The Ottawas were coming down from the north, Miami's coming in from the west. Well, look at these different Indian names and what they call themselves. Mention the Delaware. Well, that's a name from the Delaware River, which got its name from a governor of Virginia, but what got this tribe labeled the Delaware, that's not what they call themselves. They call themselves the Lenape, which just means the people. Or they call themselves the Lenni Lenape. Special people. True people. Potawatomi. Different, we get something out of the sound. Bodhiwatomi is what they call themselves. Originally, the Ottawas, the Chippewas or Ojibwas, and the Potawatomis had been one tribe. When they broke up into separate tribes, the Potawatomis kept the fire, the central fire for all the different groups together. Well, they could all come back together. Mohicans, Wolf Clan. Miami, the definition I used was allies. I've also seen Miami translated as river people. I don't speak. Shawnee, Shanawa, and actually that wasn't a name they made up. It's what other tribes gave to them because they called them the Southerners because they came out of the South. Wyandot, Island people, Ottawas, they call themselves Odawa. And if you go up into Canada, you'll see them still using Odawa. They came in and basically they got most of the control over the fur trade after the Iroquois stopped. And that's what the name means, like trade. They were involved in the trade. Mercer County, again, is not going to have a lot of Native American occupancy. It is going to stay a hunting ground. It is mainly a hunting ground. You can find a few examples of settlement, but mainly a hunting ground. And along the area we're talking about, the St. Mary's, there's something that takes place called wintering, in which we will go into a little more detail later on here, exactly. But it has to do with hunting. So again, you can find individual examples of settlements in the county, but most of the time, and most of the artifacts you're going to have are Indians coming in here for hunting, which is something they did in the winter, late fall, winter. The river is important, draws them, serves two major functions. I know when you look at the St. Mary's River today, it is kind of hard to believe, but it used to be loaded with fish. Major source of fish. To the extent that the Miamis used to call it Sturgeon Creek. I don't know if anybody's pulled a sturgeon out there for a while, but the other thing is, it's a trade route. See, you've got the Great Black Swamp, and that travel across the Great Black Swamp is hard. The river is a much easier transportation, and the tribes would travel that river to get to trading sites. And that gives the river another name, the name the Shawnees gave to it, which was the Kettle River. The reason they would call it the Kettle River is because besides guns, their next favorite trade item were kettles. And not just because they were for cooking, food preparation, but also because it was a softer metal that they could cut and make into all kinds of other things too. So we talk about, they lived in, this is an example of a Shawnee village, but this would be true of a lot of these tribes. They would live like in their permanent village, they plant crops, they do small game hunting around there, do gathering around there. But that's going to be seasonal, because that goes on, you know, spring, summer, fall, harvest. After that, they take off. And they go wintering. They come down, and this is when you get a lot of Native Americans coming into this area. They winter here. They come down here, and they hunt for, well, they get furs. They get furs down here. They'll put up, you know, temporary wigwam type structures, and they'll come down here and live. Come up with an extended hunting cabin or something for them. But they're down here, and they'll stay here, and then in the early spring they'll return to their more permanent settlements. And they do this for hundreds of years. You still have them come, Potawatomis, Kickapoo, Ottawas, Miami, Shawnee, all kinds of tribes are going to come up here temporarily and possibly Chickasaws. But the Potawatomis are still coming up here as late as 1835. There's a story as they're laying out the city of Van Wert. Some Potawatomis show up there, and that was the sign to them that this is the end of their hunting, because that city is being established there. But again, now we've got the fur trade. And we get very much European involvement in it. The major reason the French colonized North America, or stayed colonized, was the fur trade. They're very much involved in it. Just remember, folks, where you are used to be part of Nouvelle-Francais, New France. This was the flag of New France. Been around here 300 years ago, you'd be saluting this sucker. But again, the fur trade is important to them. So in 1749, this gentleman, Celeron de Bienville, captain, French Marines, leads a force of French Marines and Native Americans down along the Ohio River, planting iron plates. And the reason they're planting iron plates is to mark the boundary. You know, they're telling the English in particular and the English colonists, stay out of here. This is our hunting ground. Stay away. And of course, with Celeron de Bienville, he travels along the Ohio, heads on up along the Great Miami, and ends up passing through this area as he heads up to Fort Miami, which is the fort that used to be at Fort Wayne before Fort Wayne was established. But, so, in 1750, the year after this, an English trader crosses into this forbidden zone, a guy named John Patton, and he is going along the St. Mary's, foolishly going up to Fort Miami's. And when he comes through, right through here, he sees this. He sees a large wooden cross somewhere between where Rockford is today and where Wilshire is today. Put up there in all probability by French fur traders. He proceeds up to Fort Miami's. He gets arrested. He spends a few years in jail. back in France. But when he's released, he tells people about what he saw on his trip. And that shows up on European maps. The first thing you see showing up on maps in this area is that cross. You know, this section here is part of a larger map of North America, the John Mitchell map from 1755. And that's the cross there. That's the first thing that ever shows up on a map from around here. See up there where it says FR Twat, that weird twatchy? That's what the French call the Miamis, is their term for it. Not like crane people. But this gets to be very violent, this attempt to control the fur trade. 1747, a Miami, or actually a member of a offshoot of the Miamis, called Memiskia or something, also known to the British as Old Britain, known to the French as La Denizen, the Swan. He establishes a village at the mouth of Laramie Creek as it goes into the Great Miami. And 2 years after he establishes it, the English traders move in and they're using it as a trading site. The French are not happy about this. They decide to do something about it, and they get a guy named Charles Langlade. Charles Langlade, and this is a term that will get to be somewhat important as we go along here. Charles is a Métis. A Métis is a term for a person of mixed European and Native American ancestry. It's a French term. Same way, and they get to be, especially Canada, there's a million of them up there. They got their own separate little nation up there. But the same way, you know, they're a noticeable population. They're the same way, you know, as kind of a root of that word, what mestizos make up, and that's mixed blood Spanish and Native Americans make up the large part of the population of Mexico. But he organizes a group of Potawatomi, Ojibwas. They come down, they level the fort, they kill a bunch of Miamis, they kill some English traders. They kill, cook, and eat the swan. I think they made a point.
Somewhat.
But that would do, yeah. Sure convinced me. But we see this trade, though, established. Fur trade. French trading site. This is in Mercer County, along the St. Mary's. Again, along the St. Mary's, heading toward Wilshire. A place called the Carriole. The Carriole, the name itself means it's a small sled. And that small sled, French traders would use that, and they'd bring in supplies and set up this site, and they would trade with the Native Americans. And these are the guys that probably set up the cross. Because their site would be right by there. And next to them, there was a small Native American village that grew up seasonally. Again, because of this trade. And you start to get these other traders. 1769, Pierre Louis Lorimer is established. French-Canadian. Established at Laramie Creek in northern Shelby County. Trading with the Native Americans. But when the Revolutionary War starts, he gets involved. He takes part in raids with the Native Americans into Kentucky, supporting the English. This ticks off the Americans, and so in 1782, when George Rogers Clark leads a force of Kentuckians into Ohio, they send a detachment over to Laramie's trading post. They burn it down. He heads west from there through Indiana, through Illinois, finally locating in Spanish Missouri. But the year after he's driven out, another trading post is established at where it is, established Gertytown at the present site of St. Mary's, Ohio. And James Gertie is trading there. James is there with his Native American wife trading. He is there from 1783 to 1794. In 1794, Anthony Wayne is coming into the area. James Gertie had fought against the Americans in the Revolution. He and his brothers, George and Simon, the most famous of the three, had fought against the Americans, you know. And so then when they come up, he decides this is not a good place to be anymore, and he flees to Canada. But he'd had a small native village next to his settlement too. But again, later that becomes St. Mary's. And sometime in the 1780s, another a French trader from Kaskaskia, that's on the, it's in present-day Illinois, along the Mississippi. A guy named LaSource sets up a trading post in or near Rockford. Mr. Jones over here has found, what, Spanish reals down there? 3 Spanish reals. That's would have been, you know, one of the currencies used back then to trade. But he was settled there. And by the 1790s, he was gone when the army started marching up through here. Charles Murray, in 1800, Charles Murray was located trading out of what used to be Fort Adams. Well, there's still Fort Adams, but it was abandoned by that time. He's trading out of there. Again, he's got a Native American wife. He's a high-class character. He's running from he's been accused of being a murderer. He's kind of in hiding. Later, he gets that straightened out some way or another, and goes on to be one of the founders of St. Mary's, Ohio. Antoine Shane, another Métis person of mixed ancestry, or otherwise known as Anthony Shane. He and his Lenape wife, young bird woman, are living at the second crossing of the St. Mary's and trading with the Indians in about 1810. By 1812, the place is known as Shane's Crossing. And by 1820, it's wrong. No, excuse me. By 1820, it's Shanesville. Should know that. Another group that's going to have a little effect on settlement around here, missionaries, apostates, people who leave the faith. This section has to do with Moravians. Moravian missionaries, they're from Germany and Switzerland. Moravian missionaries have come over here in the 18th century trying to convert Native Americans to their faith. They're Anabaptist. And they have some success with the Mohicans and with the Delaware. And based on that success, they established villages in eastern Ohio in Tuscarawas County at a place called Schönbrunn for their Mohican settlers, or for the Mohican converts, and at Gannett-Hutton, which I'm probably screwing up, but at Gannett-Hutton for the Delaware converts. And they were pretty, you know, by then these people are very acculturated. They're living in cabins by this time. They're out of wigwams. But along comes the Revolutionary War. And these people want to be at peace. They don't want to be caught in the middle of a war. And so, and they've been taught pacifism by the Moravians. They don't believe in fighting. So the war's going on. And the sides are both trying to push these people into it. The British and the Americans both want these people on their side, and they won't fight. And so, the extent they help anybody, they pass on word to the Americans when Indian raiding parties are passing by their territory. But otherwise, they won't get involved in the combat. So, in the early 1780s, there are Native American raids into western Pennsylvania, and they're looking for somebody to get. They're looking for somebody to get even with. And instead of attacking people who might fight back, they attack the people at Gannad-Houghton. Pennsylvania militia march up there. They slaughter 96 Native Americans. Some men, but more women and even more children. And most of them are killed the way the person in the middle is being killed. They're beaten to death with a mallet. In the aftermath of this, these Indians say, hey, some of them, not all of them, but some of them say, hey, you sold us a bill of goods. You told us to be pacifists, and that set us up for the slaughter. And so some of these converts leave the faith. They are apostates. And a group of them under a man named Mark, a Mohican named Mark, looked for a place to go, and they worked their way across what today is Ohio. And finally, they, with the permission of the Miami who control the land, they settled along St. Mary's. Exactly where, I personally think it's at a site they call Old Town, but somewhere between Old Town and across the river from Rockford, they're there. And they're going to be there from 1782 up until 1808 in diminishing numbers. The town is going to go by a variety of names. Mohican Town, those two names in the middle. And at the top, Stevenstown. See, Mark, the original leader, dies the next year after they come out here. He's here for 1 year and then he croaks. His son becomes the leader, but there's a conflict over leadership because they're not all, most of the people there are Mohicans, but some of them are Delawares. Delawares are making claims to leadership. And so they have this conflict going on there. And this is one of the reasons why they'll lose settlers out of their group. But war. 1783, peace treaty ends the Revolutionary War. The British cede all the land from the Atlantic to the Mississippi to the new United States. The British give that land away. The problem with them giving that land away is the Indians don't believe they have the right to give their land away. That's theirs. And so when the Americans try to claim that land, you have war. The first attempt for them to make a real claim here using military force comes in 1790. Josiah Harmer, man right there, Brigadier General Josiah Harmer, leads a force of approximately 1,000 men up from Fort Washington then Cincinnati today. And they march on Kekiunga, which was a group of Indian settlements at what is today Fort Wayne, most of them, but not all of them, Miamis. He marches up, he gets his butt kicked, he marches back down again. And then, but the United States, hey, we're not quitters. What did I just do? Okay. 1791, we're going to try again. We're going to get a force led by that gentleman up there, the smug-looking guy, Arthur Sinclair. General Arthur Sinclair, also governor of the Northwest Territory, Arthur Sinclair. And he is going to lead a force of closer to 1,700 or 1,800 men up here. Problem with those men is they're poorly trained and poorly equipped and poorly led. And they're going to make it to a spot on the upper Wabash at the site of where Fort Recovery is today. They are going to camp, and the next morning they are going to be hit by a very well organized and led native force led by this guy, Turtle, war chief of the Miamis. And he is going to inflict, as I'm sure most of you know, the greatest defeat in American history by Native Americans on the United States Army. They don't have a firm estimate, but if you said 700 men, which is more than 3 times more than were killed with Custer, you'd be about right. But again, we have stick-to-itiveness. Stick-to-itiveness. So we try, again, with a third force to drive out the Native Americans. And we get Mad Anthony Wayne. Despite his name, at least in this circumstance, Mad is not very mad. He takes his time, he organizes and equips his force, and he slowly moves north against Native Americans with a much larger force than even St. Clair had. Probably at least 3,000 men. So they're heading north, and Little Turtle himself realizes, hey, we can't beat these people. We better negotiate. And so he passes leadership on, and Blue Jacket of the Shawnee is probably the dominant native figure then. You've got other guys like from the Wyandotte, you have the Crane, and from the Delaware, you have Bougainvilleas. But they're heading up. Wayne is beginning his campaign. He comes back up, establishes a fort at Fort Recovery, the site of Wayne's defeat. And there, actually 2 important battles happen when, after Wayne moves on and the fort is attacked in 2 different attempts, the Native Americans are driven away from the fort and have a very large scale and significant defeat put upon them. But as Wayne proceeds north, he builds Fort Adams. Not exactly the most important base in the world, but along the Upper St. Mary's. And that, if you don't know where that is located, where 127 crosses the St. Mary's River, on the south side of the road, a couple hundred yards to the east. And you can go up there and you're not going to find very much. Well, you're going to find mosquitoes and snakes. I was up there when we were doing the excavation back like 30-some years ago. I lasted out there about 30 minutes, you know. I didn't mind the snakes, but the mosquitoes would drive me crazy. But when Wayne is here building his fort, he's got extra soldiers. They're just hanging around. They don't need all of them to build a little fort. And as some of them explore along the river, they find different examples of these wigwams from the Native Americans that are set up there during the hunting season. And they find these giant fields of corn that are planted there. And those were planted by those apostates, the Mohicans and the Delaware. Delaware women in particular were well known for being great at agriculture, producing agricultural surpluses. But Wayne proceeds north, and at Fallen Timbers, you have a major defeat put upon the Native Americans, bringing them to negotiation and leading to the signing of the Greenville Treaty, which of course part of the treaty line passes down through southern Mercer County. But the Greenville Treaty, and with this cession of about 2/3 of Ohio to the United States, with the top thirds, northwest third, remaining with the Native Americans. Again, the only other example, we really haven't much war after that. I mean, you have different raids at different times, but it's during the War of 1812. I mean, we have armies marching through here. For one, William Henry Harrison comes through here in 1812, leading the force to end the siege. The Miamis and the Potawatomis have Fort Wayne under siege. He marches up there to end the siege. And gets to be our shortest president later. But, so, When the War of 1812 is settled with the Treaty of Ghent, 1814, everything is supposed to go back to the way it was before the war. It's supposed to be a tie. But. The British win, because this war doesn't mean much to them. They just beat Napoleon. That's a big deal. The Canadians win. They just stopped the Americans from conquering their territory. We're the big country, they're a little country. It's important for Canadian nationalism. We win. Even though we just held off the biggest, most powerful country in the world. The Indians get shafted. And it doesn't show in the treaty. It says everything's supposed to go back the way it was. Once that treaty is signed, the British abandon the Indians. They don't have that support anymore. They're left out to dry. And now the United States can make all the land demands it wants, and it does. Settlers are pushing it, and they're going to, the natives are gone. Anthony Shane is very much involved in this. This is from the Rockford Bureau. Anthony Shane and his wife, the young bird woman. Anthony Shane didn't look anything like this. Anthony Shane, if you want to know what Anthony Shane, we have brief descriptions of Anthony Shane. And the description is, he is a hard-looking man. Hard-looking and dark complected. So if you can imagine Charles Bronson or Danny Trejo, you're getting pretty close to what Anthony Shane looked like. And he wouldn't dress like that either. But on the other hand, now we don't have any description of his wife. None that I'm aware of. But I will say about that, that's pretty close to what, the Shanes were considered rich by the other Native Americans. They were considered rich. And that's what a well-to-do Native American woman would have worn at the time. And I don't know, the age is probably pretty close. When that, about 1820, she would have been in her late 40s, early 50s. Shane gets, for his service in the War of 1812, Shane gets 320 acres of land given to him, and it's the 330 acres where it's called Shane's Grant, but it's the 320 acres where Rockford sits today. It's where his trading post used to sit, and it's where Rockford sits today. But again, his reward during the War of 1812, he led he was called Captain Shane then, and he led a group of Shawnee Scouts in service of the United States, which is better than what he did back in 1794 when he fought on the Indian side against the United States. But hey, don't always bring that up. Now, we talked about that book, the Baldwin book. They divide the country into these different sections, and each section has to do with one particular treaty. When we're looking for us here, that 87 is the 1817 Fort Meigs Treaty. You'll notice that the area south of the St. Mary's, most of Mercer County is not in that. Only that little bit of Mercer County above the St. Mary's River. But in 1817, the United States government pressures the Native Americans into selling that 87 there, which is the large part of northwest Ohio, right there. Shane is very much involved in this. He goes among the Native Americans and helps them to sign the treaty. I mean, he's part of Ottawa, he's part French, part of Ottawa. He has influence. His wife is a Delaware, a Lenape. So he goes among these tribes and he helps persuade them to sign the treaty. And then he's one of the interpreters for the treaty. So he has that going for him. But And they give it, and most of this money, the Wyandots and the Ottawas are the tribes that have the claim to most of this land, and they're gonna get a few $1,000s. They get chump change. I mean, there's no way. I mean, we're talking pennies an acre or something like that at best. But 1817, they signed that, and that land is gone. Shane, for his efforts, gets himself a reserve across from present-day Rockford, 640 acres. He builds a cabin there, which at the time, as we will see later, at the time was the biggest structure in Mercer County. Doesn't look like much today, but it was a 2-story cabin. And sets up a farm there, and his wife plants that farm, and it's an impressive farm. She is very good at farming. She's a Lenape. When you look at this, back when the Greenville Treaty was signed, and I know these numbers are a little small, but when the Greenville Treaty was signed, we got the Native Americans for a few $1,000s, got basically 17 million acres. In the Fort Meigs Treaty, the treaty we just talked about, again, for chump change, they got 4.5 million acres. This is all in Ohio. We're going to see the next treaty is the St. Mary's Treaty, right down the road. This is signed the very next year. Now, the Fort Meigs Treaty, all these tribes show up for it, but it's basically with the Ottawas and the Wyandots. The 1880 St. Mary's Treaty is with the Miami. Remember from the map, the Miamis are the ones that have the claim for this land. Now, again, that 99 there, when we look at it, it's really part of a bigger claim that goes into Indiana. When you see that 99 up there, you can see it's, most of central Indiana in this little extension into Ohio that includes Mercer County. So that's what they're negotiating for in 1818. With, again, a lot of tribes are involved in the negotiations, but it's mainly with the Miami. They're making the decision. This guy's making the decision. One of the guys making it. This is Jean-Baptiste Richardson-Bretz. He is a Métis. French-Canadian dad, Miami mom. His mother was related into the Miami leadership. And he becomes the chief, the civil chief, the peacetime chief of the Miamis. And going about this, he also becomes the richest man in Indiana. If you're looking back in the 1830s and 40s, he's it. The rich guy. He is involved, and these other tribal leaders are involved in negotiating the treaties. And what he does is he gets a little money for the tribe, but he does very, very well for himself and his family. Through a series of tribes, not just this treaty, but through a series of treaties, he is going to get 44 sections of land for his family. For himself, his children, his grandchildren. 44 640-acre sections. Plus he's going to get, out of one of those treaties, he gets that house he has up in Fort Wayne up there. You got that? Good deal. Now, I will give them one thing. They do allow other Indians to go onto, they can live on their reserves, which is what these places are described as. They're like little reservations. But for himself, among the sections he's going to get are 2 sections north of Wilshire. Actually, there's a big rock up there on Route 49 that shows where one of those reserves was. But also, he's going to get 1 section along the St. Mary's here for one of his grandsons, Crescent, and for another section for another grandson, Blackloon. Also in negotiations, one for Pierre Labadie. He's another Metis. He gets land along the St. Mary's in Mercer County. The only pure blood of the bunch, Charlie, gets one section. With a name like Charlie, you're probably surprised, but yeah. Charlie gets one. Louis Godefroy gets 6 sections. Why does Louis Godefroy get 6 sections? Because his brother, Francis Godefroy, is the war chief of the Miamis. And while Richardville is getting 44 sections, Godefroy is getting 26 sections for his family, including 6 sections along the river here for good old Louis. Now, almost all these guys themselves, they don't live here. They let other Indians live on their land. They don't live here because each one of these guys, Black Loon, Crescent, Labadie, Godefroy, Louis Godefroy, they all have their own villages, not just their own homes, but their own villages back in Indiana. But that's it. You can see here going down along the river. You're getting out around, heading towards 127, going east. Godefroy's, Shane's Reserve, Black Loon, Crescent, Charlie, Labadie. If you headed up, across into Van Wert County, you'd see Richardville's too. But that is these Indian reserves right in northern Mercer County. That's the platting of Godefroy's Reserve right there. And again, all those descriptions down there have to do with this oak tree and this rock and whatever. But removal. The pressure is on. Well, wait a minute. Let's look at this one. There we go. With the signing of these treaties, Euro-Americans, United States citizens, they start moving in at that time. You'll have a few traders coming through here in the earlier periods, but for real settlers, this is when it starts. 1819, 1820, and they're heading on up, usually using the river as transportation, and they're coming to locate in Mercer County. And they would have run into Native Americans that would look like this. These two guys are basically Shawnees. And that dress is that kind, not exactly that, but that kind of dress. And the turbans, they love these turbans. You see those very large earrings that person has on there? Those aren't earrings. Those are cutting the outer section of your ear and pulling it out and decorating it. It's a style statement there, boy. Some tattoo. But again, good looking. Intelligent, attractive looking women. And if you, Native American women, this is what Native American women back about that period of time would look like. These are mainly these are Miami and Delaware, and a bunch of Potawatomi women there. So you can get the idea of the style at the time among Native Americans. But the pressure's on. Native Americans are in a bad situation. The government of the United States is pressuring them. White settlers, pushed by racism and land hunger, are pushing them. And within their own tribes, there are problems. I mean, disease. Over the years, this is what kills 90%, more than 90% of Native Americans over the years. They're killed by disease. Alcoholism, of course, kind of what we use, kind of a stereotype. Among Native Americans, alcoholism brought these people in. One thing you've got to realize, though, back then, among white settlers, those people drank 4 times as much alcohol as the average people drank today. I mean, alcohol just flooded the frontier. And so they weren't exactly the greatest example themselves. Intertribal violence, so all this pressure added to it with alcohol and everything else led to not violence against whites or violence even against other tribes, but violence within tribes. Native Americans killing other Native Americans in violent rages usually, sometimes fueled by alcohol. And it gets to be very tense. One of the Miami's leaders talking during this period of time, a guy named LaFontaine, said that the death rate among Miamis, that for every child born, there was a Miami killed by another Miami. We're not saying that they were losing population at the same rate. We're saying acts of violence were matching the birth rate. So they have this going on. This gives you an idea of what happens to these Native Americans. And the number of the 12,000 is kind of an estimate, I think. But this is what's happening to the Miamis over those years. This is why you see so much talked about back then about the tribes banishing. And again, the major instigator, though, it's not warfare. It's not intertribal, it's not intertribal violence. It's not alcoholism, it's disease. For an example of intertribal violence, we look at this gentleman right here. This is Billy Shane. Sacagawea. He is the son of Anthony Shane. Billy fought in the War of 1812. He was wounded in the War of 1812. But he is playing a game with a group of other Native Americans, a game called Moccasin. Well, Moccasin, we know the shell game. You know the shell game. Put a pea under a shell, move it around. They played their version of that game, except they would play it, not with shells, but with moccasins. And they would take a pea or a bullet or a small rock and put it into the moccasins, and they would switch it around and you guess. And when they did it, it was a group activity. Everybody's watching, with a lot of razzing going on if you screwed up and made the wrong choice. And so he's playing, and he's losing, and he's losing, and he's losing. And he finally, somebody gives to him what he considers as the ultimate insult. He says, "You play like a woman." Oh. And based on that statement, he kills the guy. Luckily for Billy Shane and the Shanes, Anthony is rich he's rich comparatively. And he is able to cover the grave. We're guilt. The idea, we're going to pay you so much. If you accept this, no vendetta. And so he gives them horses, he gives them blankets, he gives them silver trinkets, all this stuff. And when they accept that, no vendetta. And so they move on from that. But removal is taking place. Anthony Shane leaves the area in about 1828. He and his family go west, and he serves as an interpreter on the Shawnee and Delaware Reservation in Kansas. But the tribes are going to be removed around here. We know that at Lewistown and at Wapak, they're going to be gone by 1833. Again, that pressure for land hunger is there. The last tribe to leave Ohio were the Wyandots in 1843. They were at Upper Sandusky at that time. The Miamis themselves, and this is a deal, the Miamis, they're ready to remove in 1846. They finally got up their land over in Indiana. But a lot of these ones, these Métis in particular, are able, because they are individual landowners, to stay. They're able to stay and become U.S. citizens, where a lot of the purebloods are shipped to Kansas. And this leads for a separation in the Miami tribe, so that you have the Miami tribe of Oklahoma and the Miami tribe of Indiana. And since then, there are different efforts have been made to reunite them. But again, a lot of this goes back to the 1840s. But we have a few signs around here. Of course, you know, we have you guys find different artifacts from the Native Americans, arrowheads, other artifacts. We have a few other signs like signs that they've been here, like road names, Godfrey's Road, Godfrey's Road. Shane's cabin, at one time, a horse was built there for a man that was half Native American and a woman that was pure Native American. And at one time, this was the largest structure in Mercer County. 2 stories, big deal, big job. But except for those signs, you know, all these people that spent all this time here, it's a loss for us. Trade beads. It's one of the things they used to trade for back then.
Will you be taking any questions at this time?
Well, they can ask. Yes, sir.
I was disappointed you didn't mention Tecumseh and the Battle of Fallen Timbers. That
Well,
was,
do you?
that was,
Okay, I'll talk about Tecumseh if you'd like. Anthony Shane is the most important authority on Tecumseh. Anthony Shane was interviewed at Rockford, what is today Rockford, and that became, his interview is the most important one in the writing of the book by Benjamin Drake about Tecumseh's life. His first wife, young bird woman, was his second wife. His first wife was a Dawn Shawnee, and she was related part of the tribal leadership. Anthony Shane, like I said, was at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, as Tecumseh was, although not in a leadership position. And of course, Shane is also at the Battle of the Thames or Moravian Town, where he's killed. And Shane is one of the 3 men who identify his body.
supposedly.
That's a matter of argument.
According to Shawnee Treasure, nobody knows where that body is.
Well, the body stolen later. It was identified on the field.
No, but it wasn't Tecumseh, it was somebody else.
Well, that's what some people say.
That's the
Hey,
Shawnee.
a guy got elected vice president of the United States based on killing that guy, you know?
Well, I won't talk about today's politics.
Well, I'm talking about 1840 politics. Actually, 1836. Anthony Shane played a role in electing, well, I guess I'll ring it off in the corners here, but Anthony Shane played a significant role into electing a man vice president of the United States. He identifies his body. It might be the body of Tecumseh, but that body has a certain set of wounds to its chest and to its body. And the kind of wounds are associated with the kind of load that a colonel named Richard Mentor Johnson had in his gun. It's a combination of shot and ball. It went through the body they found, like on this angle, because Richard Mentor Johnson was on horseback and the man who was supposed to be Tecumseh was on foot. He shot, the ball passed through him. Based on that identification, Richard Mentor Johnson, who'd already been a member of the House of Representatives, becomes known as the man who killed Tecumseh. This will lead in 1836 to him being elected vice president of the United States. And I'll tell you one thing I know for sure, he took good care of Anthony Shane later on. I showed you that grant, one of the guys who pushed that grant through Congress was Richard Manor Johnson, and that's why Rockford's that word. Yes, young man.
Something to relate to Lewis Godfrey, witness here today. We have a member of the Roebuck family who still live on the land that his ancestors bought from Lewis Godfrey.
Wow.
It'll soon be approaching 200 years on the same farm. He's got the original deed to where Lewis Godfrey signed an X along with an interpreter. But you've seen the century farms in the county. They're gonna be celebrating two century farms, and they still own and farm the same ground that his family bought from Lewis Godfrey. And that's gonna be a big deal. You know, the commissioners, I would think, in the Mercer County Historical Society, and would like you to be part of that.
Oh, really?
Well, you do so well with what you're doing. I just, hats off to you.
Well, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. I'd be glad to.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, young man.
Curious, why was the St. Mary's River named the St. Mary's? I'm thinking it was because of the French named it, of course, and it was on the St. Joseph, which also flows into the Maumee. There was a mission on there, so could there possibly be a mission on the St. Mary's, the St. Mary's mission?
You're onto something there, sir. Yeah, I'll tell you. I was curious about it, and I started going through all these different sources, trying to find out how the heck, I worked at Rockford, I saw the river, I drove over it every day. How the heck does the river ever got its name? And I went through all these sources, I couldn't find a dang thing. So I called up to the Allen County Historical Society up in Fort Wayne. And this is based on what they think the best evidence is. That a Catholic missionary was traveling up the Maumee, from the Great Lakes, a guy named Henry Novell, Catholic priest. And when they reached the point where the St. Joe and St. Mary's flow in to form the Maumee, they camped there. And I'm not too good on my religious holidays, but the next day was a celebration of this particular religious holiday. And based on that, they think it was at that time that, with that tie to Christ and everything, that he named the St. Joe and the St. Mary's. So that would have been in 1676, if I'm right. But and again, I've looked at Nouvell's letters and him being there. He doesn't say that he's there at that time in 1676. He doesn't say he named the river then, but they think that's the most likely time it happened.
Some of the old maps, like even what you pulled up with the cross, it's called the halfway cross, or actually one has some scribble and it's more of a pelt map. I can show you that later. But it looks like the source. But a lot of them have a symbol. But to me, it would be a topographical symbol of a church right around the Rockford area.
Well, again, there's a cross there, and that's a halfway cross.
Right.
But I've never seen any, well, maybe you've seen something I haven't seen. I haven't seen one that shows, in any kind of record that I've ever seen that shows, the nearest place you would have found a Catholic priest back then was at Fort Miami's, I would think.
But I know there was a La Source.
La Source, yeah.
Who was a priest of
Kaskaskia.
Yeah. And wasn't he at Cahokia at the time? Or no, that would be like 1730s, maybe.
He would have been there. No, he would. When La Source was here, at least the fur trader one, that would have been 1780s when he would have been here. Because when they were preparing to march up here for their camp, when Farmer's marching up, Sinclair and Harmer are communicating back and forth. And St. Clair is telling Harmer to talk to LaSource because LaSource will know where the Native Americans have their storages of corn. So you have that then, you know, and it was just so he was there. So by 1790, when they come up here, he's not living here, but they know where to contact him.
Right, because in Denny's notes, they
Yeah,
note that they camped near the ruins of
Right.
LaSource's old house,
right.
which I think is Rockford.
Well, I
Right.
think where Mr. Jones over there found the coins that he found would have been right around
Yeah.
that area. But, no, that's it. But again, I've seen the cross on the map, I've never seen, and I don't know of any other evidence that there would have been a church there.
The only thing I could go by is, there's like a cross on top of a mound,
Mm-hmm.
which, I'm almost sure is like a symbol for a church. But, I can show you later, that's, whatever.
Sure. Again, I see it, and one thing about it, Lorimer comes in here in 1749. There's crap going along the river. He doesn't see a cross. 1750, Patton does see a cross, so it gives us a pretty good idea of when they put the cross up.
Yeah, it was quite early.
Yeah, so it'd been 1750 probably around that time, right before Patton came through. I would think.
All right. Wow. Again, thank you, everybody. Let's give one more round of applause.
Appreciate the questions.
If you guys have any more questions after today, just let us know. Keep in mind, our next presentation in honor of Native American History Month, that is what November is. Our next program will be November 23rd at 2 p.m. That is a Sunday, just like today, and that next program will take place here. It is going to be Native Americans of Chickasaw. So we're very, very excited to learn more about the Native American activity in Mercer County. And if you guys have any more questions, feel free to stick around. If not, oh yes, also, take advantage of our refreshments over here. Cookies, water, I believe, as well. But thank you again, everyone, for coming in today. We appreciate it.
Good one.